Have you ever wondered what it feels like to freeze to death? They say it's peaceful in the end, your body numbing until you drift into eternal sleep. But what if something kept you conscious through every excruciating moment? What if something wanted you to feel every crystal of ice forming in your veins? Before we continue with this disturbing tale that was hidden from public knowledge for decades, I'd like to ask you to comment below and let me know where you're watching from. This channel needs your support to continue bringing these secret historical cases to light, so please consider subscribing if you haven't already. The winter of 1947 was particularly brutal in northern Maine. Record-breaking snowfall had blanketed the region for weeks, with temperatures plummeting to 30 below zero. The small logging town of Blackwood Hollow, nestled between the Canadian border and the vast Maine wilderness, had grown accustomed to harsh winters, but this one tested even the most hardened locals. It was against this unforgiving backdrop that 24-year-old Thomas Caldwell and his new bride, 22-year-old Elizabeth Montgomery Caldwell, disappeared on January 12, 1947, just 3 days after their wedding at the Blackwood Hollow Congregational Church. The young couple had been last seen leaving their reception at approximately 8:30 in the evening, departing in Thomas's family carriage pulled by 2 horses for their honeymoon cabin 10 miles north of town. They never arrived. Sheriff Harold Mackenzie organized a search party the following morning when the newlyweds' absence was reported by Elizabeth's frantic mother. The blizzard that had descended upon the region overnight made the search nearly impossible. Visibility was reduced to mere feet, and temperatures had fallen to lethal levels. "We searched for 7 days straight," wrote Deputy James Finch in his official report. "The conditions were the worst I'd seen in my 32 years in Maine. It was as if the forest itself was working against us, changing paths we'd just cleared, erasing tracks almost immediately. I'll admit, some of the men started talking about curses and such nonsense. Superstition runs deep in these parts." The search was officially called off on January 20th, when another storm threatened the region. The townsfolk held a memorial service, 2 empty caskets lowered into the frozen ground of Blackwood Cemetery. Life in the small community eventually returned to its normal rhythms, though locals would later report that Thomas's mother, Agatha Caldwell, could be seen wandering the forest's edge on stormy nights, calling out for her son. The case of the missing newlyweds might have remained just another tragedy in rural Maine's history, filed away and forgotten, if not for what happened exactly 60 years later. On January 12, 2007, doctoral student Rebecca Hayes was researching historical weather patterns in Maine's northern counties when she stumbled upon something unusual in Blackwood Hollow's meteorological records. The winter of 1947 had indeed been exceptionally cold, but the records showed a highly localized temperature anomaly on the night the Caldwells disappeared. While surrounding areas recorded temperatures of -25 degrees Fahrenheit, the forest area north of Blackwood Hollow registered an inexplicable drop to -70 degrees, a temperature virtually impossible in that region and more typical of the Antarctic interior. "I initially assumed it was a recording error," Hayes noted in her research journal. But the same anomaly appeared in 3 separate weather stations. The meteorologist who took the readings that night included a personal note that I found chilling. He wrote, "Temperature equipment malfunctioning or something ungodly is happening in the North Woods tonight. The air feels wrong. I've never felt cold like this." Intrigued by this discovery, Hayes traveled to Blackwood Hollow, which by 2007 had shrunk to little more than 100 residents. The logging industry had dried up decades earlier, leaving behind a community struggling to survive. The local historical society, essentially one elderly man named Walter Peterson operating out of a converted garage, was eager to share information about the town's past with the young researcher. "Oh, the Caldwell case," Peterson told Hayes during their first meeting. "That's a wound that never healed in this town. Funny you should ask about it now. It's the anniversary today." Peterson revealed that while the official police investigation had been closed, local interest in the case never truly died. Rumors persisted for years. Some claimed the couple had eloped to Canada. Others suggested Thomas had murdered his bride and fled. The darker local legends spoke of something ancient and hungry in the woods that periodically required sacrifices. What Peterson shared next would dramatically change the course of Hayes's research and lead to the eventual solving of the 60-year-old mystery. Agatha Caldwell, Thomas's mother, never accepted that her son was dead, Peterson explained. She spent every penny of the family fortune searching for answers until her death in 1962. She hired private investigators, psychics, anyone who claimed they could help. Most took her money and gave her nothing. But there was one man, a detective from Boston named Sullivan, who came up here in the summer of '48. He found something, but whatever it was drove him half mad. He checked himself into a sanitarium shortly after returning to Boston. Before he did, though, he mailed Agatha a sealed box with instructions that it should only be opened 100 years after the disappearance. "Where is this box now?" Hayes had asked. "Right here in Blackwood Hollow," Peterson replied. "After Agatha died, it passed to the town council for safekeeping. It's been sitting in the basement of the town hall ever since. Nobody gave it much thought until your visit reminded me of it. The box, a simple wooden affair with tarnished brass fittings, was indeed still in the town hall's basement storage room, gathering dust among tax records and town meeting minutes from decades past. While the instructions were to keep it sealed until 2047, the current town council, consisting of 5 elderly residents, saw no harm in opening it early given Hayes's academic interest. Perhaps they also yearned for closure on a mystery that had haunted their community for generations. Inside the box was Detective Sullivan's leather-bound journal, several photographs, a small cloth bag containing what appeared to be black soil or ash, and a sealed envelope addressed to "Whoever is brave enough to finish what I started." The journal detailed Sullivan's investigation during the summer of 1948. His early entries were methodical and professional, cataloguing interviews with townsfolk and searches of the surrounding forest. As the days progressed, however, his handwriting became increasingly erratic and his entries more disturbing. July 18th, 1948. Interviewed logger who claims to have seen strange lights in the North Woods on the night of the disappearance. Initially dismissed as unreliable due to his known drinking habits, but his account matches those of 3 other witnesses who had no contact with each other. All describe cold lights and a humming sound that made their teeth hurt. One witness, a child at the time, said the lights made the stars go away. July 23rd. Found an area approximately 7 miles north of town, where nothing grows. Perfectly circular clearing, roughly 30 feet in diameter. No vegetation, no insects, no signs of wildlife. Soil is strangely dark and fine, almost like ash. Temperature noticeably lower than surrounding forest, even on this summer day. Collected samples. July 26th. Local Native American guide refused to enter clearing or even approach it. Says his people have known about this place for centuries. They call it the Cold Mouth. Says it swallows heat and occasionally people. When I pressed him for more information, he left and refused payment. The entries continued, growing increasingly paranoid. Sullivan described feeling watched in the forest, hearing whispers in his hotel room at night, and suffering from vivid nightmares of people frozen in poses of terror. His final entry was nearly illegible, the pen having torn through the paper in places. August 2nd. I found the carriage, God help me. It was inside the clearing, buried just inches beneath that black soil, perfectly preserved. The horses, too, mid-stride, frozen solid. And them, the couple. They're inside. Their faces. They're still aware somehow. Eyes moving, following me. Temperature dropped 40 degrees when I uncovered them. Had to rebury everything quickly. Something is awakening. Coming for me now. The cold is alive and hungry. If you're reading this, burn the clearing. Salt the earth. May God forgive me for what I've disturbed. The photographs in the box showed the clearing Sullivan had described, though nothing unusual was visible except the conspicuous absence of vegetation. The final photograph, however, partially obscured by what appeared to be the photographer's thumb, seemed to show the corner of a wooden carriage emerging from dark soil. The sealed envelope contained a hand-drawn map with precise coordinates and a single sentence. They are still frozen, but not dead. Upon reviewing Sullivan's materials, Hayes immediately contacted the Maine State Police Cold Case Unit. While initially skeptical, Detective Marcus Reynolds agreed to visit the site identified on Sullivan's map, accompanied by Hayes, Peterson, and a small team of forensic specialists. The clearing was exactly where Sullivan had indicated, though it had expanded to nearly 50 feet in diameter. Ground-penetrating radar confirmed a large object buried approximately 2 feet below the surface. What the team unearthed would defy scientific explanation, and reignite local fears that had simmered quietly for decades. The carriage was perfectly preserved, without a single sign of decay or weathering, despite having been buried for 60 years. More impossibly, it was encased in a layer of clear ice despite the summer heat. The two horses were frozen mid-stride, their eyes open, frost clinging to their manes and tails. Most disturbing of all were Thomas and Elizabeth Caldwell, found inside the carriage, embracing each other. The preservation was beyond anything I've encountered in 30 years of forensic work, Dr. Elaine Harper of the State Medical Examiner's Office later stated. The subject showed no signs of decomposition whatsoever. Tissue samples were taken, and preliminary analysis indicated cellular structures remained intact, as if frozen moments after death. However, more concerning were the expressions on the victims' faces, which displayed awareness and terror, inconsistent with hypothermia deaths, which typically present peaceful expressions as consciousness fades. As the team worked to extract the carriage and its occupants, several unexplained phenomena occurred. Equipment malfunctioned. Temperatures in the immediate area plummeted. 3 team members reported hearing whispers and seeing movement from the corner of their eye. Most disturbing, multiple witnesses claimed that when first exposed to sunlight, Elizabeth Caldwell's eyes seemed to track their movements before the body was fully removed from the ice. The carriage and its occupants were transported to a secure facility at the University of Maine for further study. What happened next would be documented in a series of increasingly frantic emails and reports between researchers, before all communication abruptly ceased on January 20th, 2007, exactly 1 week after the discovery, mirroring the original search period in 1947. Professor William Thornton, head of the research team, sent the final documented communication at 3:17 a.m. The temperature controls have failed again. It's dropping rapidly in the containment area. The ice is spreading beyond the specimens, covering the walls now. Elizabeth's eyes are definitely moving, tracking us. Thomas's hand has changed position since yesterday. The whispering is constant now. Security footage shows shapes moving in the lab at night when it should be empty. Dr. Kazan found a journal from 1823 describing an identical case, a missing couple found frozen decades later, still preserved. And another from 1762. This has happened before, it's a cycle. We've contacted the government team, but I don't think they'll arrive in time. Something is waking up. If you receive this, Protocol 7 is in effect. Seal the facility. Do not attempt recovery of personnel or specimens. I repeat, do not. The message ended mid-sentence. When authorities arrived at the research facility the following morning, they discovered the entire building encased in ice, despite outside temperatures being well above freezing. Inside, all 7 researchers were found frozen in positions suggesting they had been fleeing from something. The carriage and the Caldwells were gone, leaving behind only a trail of black, ash-like soil leading into the nearby woods. The official explanation provided to the public cited an experimental refrigerant leak and tragic accident. The facility was permanently closed, the records sealed under national security protocols. Rebecca Hayes was officially listed among the casualties, though her body was reportedly never found. However, Walter Peterson, who had remained in Blackwood Hollow during the laboratory examination, told a different story to local journalist Emily Winters 3 years later. By this point, Peterson was residing in a nursing home, considered by most to be suffering from dementia. "They brought it back," Peterson whispered to Winters during their interview. "Whatever was out there in those woods, sleeping in the cold and dark, waiting for more warmth to consume, they woke it up. The government knows. They've always known. Why do you think they built that weather research station out there in 1952? They're not studying the weather. They're studying it." Peterson claimed that every 60 years, the entity requires new vessels, human hosts, whose life energy and warmth it consumes gradually, keeping them in a state between life and death, frozen but conscious for decades. The couples are merely its preferred form of sustenance, their love creating the warmth it craves most. "It'll happen again in 2067, were Peterson's final words on the matter. Another young couple will go missing in those woods. And 60 years later, someone will find them, perfectly preserved, and the cycle will continue. Peterson died in his sleep the night after the interview. The nursing home reported that his room was unusually cold that morning, frost forming on the inside of his windows, despite the building's heating system running at full capacity. Emily Winters began investigating Peterson's claims, requesting government records about the weather station he had mentioned. 3 months into her investigation, Winters disappeared while driving near Blackwood Hollow. Her abandoned car was found on a forest road, the interior covered in a thin layer of frost despite it being August. A search party found no trace of the journalist. In the years since, Blackwood Hollow has become something of a macabre tourist destination for paranormal enthusiasts and true crime aficionados. Local businesses have embraced the legend, selling frozen lovers memorabilia and offering tours of sites connected to the case. The clearing where the carriage was found remains conspicuously absent from these tours, however, and locals still refuse to enter that part of the forest. Those who ignore warnings and venture to the coordinates have reported equipment failures, sudden temperature drops, and an overwhelming sense of being watched. Several hikers claim to have seen a young couple walking among the trees at dusk, holding hands, their faces obscured and their footsteps leaving no marks in the snow or soil. Most disturbing are the reports from the winter of 2019, when 3 separate witnesses described seeing a young woman matching Rebecca Hayes' description standing at the forest's edge during a snowstorm, her clothes outdated and her lips blue with cold, apparently trying to warn people away from the woods. When approached, she reportedly whispered, "They're still conscious under the ice. All of us, still conscious, still feeling, still freezing. For decades, for centuries." The Maine State Police officially maintain that these sightings are hoaxes perpetuated to support local tourism. The cold case file for Thomas and Elizabeth Caldwell was officially closed in 2010, listed as solved, accidental death due to exposure. The files regarding the research facility incident remain classified. Yet every year on January 12th, flowers appear at the empty graves of Thomas and Elizabeth in Blackwood Cemetery. The flowers are always partially frozen, even when left on unusually warm winter days. No one has ever seen who leaves them. While the official investigation may have been closed, the mystery of Blackwood Hollow continues to unfold for those willing to look deeper. What government files don't tell us what they've actively worked to suppress reveals a pattern stretching back centuries before Thomas and Elizabeth Caldwell ever exchanged their vows. In the fall of 2020, an anonymous source within the Department of Energy leaked a partial file to independent researcher Danielle Mercer. The document, dated 1954 and stamped with multiple classified watermarks, referenced Operation Cold Harvest and outlined the establishment of what was publicly known as the Blackwood Hollow Weather Research Station. The true purpose of this facility, according to the leaked document, was ongoing containment and study of the temporal thermal anomaly first documented by colonial settlers in 1734 and responsible for periodic disappearances in the region. The document further stated that the anomaly appears to operate on a 60-year cycle of dormancy and feeding, and that subjects absorbed into the anomaly's influence remain in a state of suspended animation while their thermal energy is gradually extracted. Most telling was a paragraph referencing previous extraction attempts that resulted in catastrophic temperature drops affecting areas of up to 1 square mile and the loss of all personnel involved. The document concluded with a recommendation that no further retrieval operations be attempted and that the anomaly should be monitored from a safe distance with minimal human exposure. Mercer, whose grandfather had worked as a technician at the supposedly abandoned weather station until 1997, began connecting historical disappearances in the region to the 60-year cycle mentioned in the document. What she discovered painted a disturbing pattern, stretching back far longer than anyone had imagined. It wasn't just the Caldwells in 1947, Mercer wrote in her self-published monograph, The Cold That Waits. There were Jonathan and Mary Winters in 1887, found frozen in their wagon in 1947 by a logging crew, only to disappear from the local morgue that night. Before them, William and Sarah Prescott vanished while traveling to their homestead in 1827, discovered 60 years later by a hunter who described them as fresh as yesterday and enclosed in ice that wouldn't melt over my fire. The pattern continues back through colonial records and into Native American oral histories, which describe the cold spirit that keeps its victims aware through endless winters. Mercer's research took a more personal turn when she discovered her grandfather's journal hidden within the family home's attic. Terence Mercer had worked as a maintenance technician at the weather station from 1969 until his retirement in 1997. His journal entries revealed that the facility housed sophisticated monitoring equipment focused on the clearing where the Caldwells had been found, but they also contained more troubling information. December 12, 1986, another breach in the perimeter sensors last night. Temperature dropped 40 degrees in Sector 7 for exactly 9 minutes before returning to normal. The motion sensors captured something moving at the edge of the clearing, but the cameras failed again. Dr. Harriman insists it was just a malfunction, but I found those black soil traces again this morning, leading from the clearing to the east fence before disappearing. Something is coming out of there at night. January 19, 1987. They brought in a new specimen today. I wasn't supposed to see it, but I was doing maintenance in the sub-basement when they wheeled it in. A glass container with what looked like ice inside, but clear as crystal. There was something in the ice, fingers, I think, human fingers moving slightly. The nightmares started the day they brought that thing in. The journal continued with increasingly disturbing entries, describing how staff members began experiencing extreme cold spots throughout the facility, frost forming inside their homes miles away from the station, and vivid nightmares of being trapped in ice while still conscious. Most concerning were Terence's descriptions of researchers who worked directly with the specimen, who reportedly began showing unusual symptoms, their body temperatures dropping below normal levels, their movements becoming sluggish and their personalities changing in subtle but disturbing ways. They've kept it in the special containment room where the temperature is maintained at negative 100 degrees. Dr. Harriman says it's just a fragment and that the parent entity remains dormant. I don't believe him. February 3rd, 1987. I don't think Harriman is Harriman anymore. His eyes have changed. There's something moving behind them, like looking through ice at something swimming underneath. He doesn't blink enough. Yesterday I saw him standing in the walk-in freezer without a coat, just staring at the wall and whispering. When I asked if he was okay, he looked at me like he was trying to remember how human faces work. Then he smiled and said, "It's quite comfortable in here, Terence. You should join me sometime. The cold preserves everything." His breath didn't fog in the air. Everyone else's does at those temperatures. The final entries suggested that whatever had been contained within the facility was gradually influencing or possessing the researchers working closest to it. Terence described increasing security measures, staff being removed and replaced without explanation, and a growing sense that the government was losing control of whatever they were studying. His last entry, dated March 17, 1987, was brief. They're shutting down all civilian access to the sub-basement levels. Military personnel arrived yesterday, not regular army, some special unit with equipment I've never seen before. They're talking about sterilization protocols. I've copied all my maintenance logs and this journal. If something happens to me, Mary knows where to find this. The temperature dropped to negative 30 in my house last night. I could see my breath inside. Something was watching me through the bedroom window, but when I looked there was only frost in the shape of handprints on the glass. I think it knows I know. Terence Mercer survived his time at the facility, ultimately retiring and living until 2013, when he died of apparent heart failure at age 82. The coroner's report, which Danielle managed to obtain, noted an unusual presentation. Terence's body temperature at discovery was just 50 degrees Fahrenheit, despite his home being heated to 72 degrees, and small crystals of ice were found in his peripheral tissues during the autopsy, a phenomenon the medical examiner could not explain. Following her grandfather's research trail, Danielle Mercer attempted to locate former employees of the weather station. Most had died under various circumstances, many from rare conditions involving circulatory failure or hypothermia even during summer months. Those still living refused to speak with her, except for one, former security guard Frank Miller, now residing in a Veterans Affairs care facility in Augusta, suffering from advanced dementia. During periods of lucidity, Miller shared fragmented recollections of his time at the facility from 1985 to 1988. His most coherent account described an incident in February 1987, which coincided with the concerning entries in Terence Mercer's journal. They brought something back from the clearing, Miller told Danielle during a recorded interview. Not the whole thing, just a piece of it, a sample. They thought the containment protocols were sufficient. Arrogant fools. You can't contain something that exists partially outside our dimension. It was just ice to most eyes. Beautiful, clear ice that never melted. But if you looked at it long enough, you began to see things moving inside. Faces, so many faces, and they saw you back. Miller claimed that Dr. Harriman and 3 other researchers had become changed after prolonged exposure to the specimen. Their skin got pale, almost translucent. Their movements became too smooth, too precise. They stopped eating in the cafeteria, stopped drinking coffee. One day I brushed against Harriman in the hallway. His skin was cold as a corpse, but he was walking and talking just fine. According to Miller, the situation deteriorated until March 1987, when a specialized military unit was deployed to the facility. They called it a containment breach, but that wasn't accurate. It was more like a merger. Whatever was in that ice had gotten into the researchers, changing them cell by cell. And they were changing the facility too. Temperatures impossible to regulate, ice forming on walls in sealed rooms, people hearing whispers from empty corridors. They brought in a unit I'd never seen before, guys with special suits and weapons that emitted heat somehow. They evacuated all non-essential personnel and executed Protocol Winter Grave. I don't know exactly what happened after we were evacuated, but I know they burned that place down to the bedrock before sealing it under concrete, and it still wasn't enough. The weather station was indeed demolished in 1987, according to public records, supposedly due to budget cuts and obsolete equipment. The site was leveled, filled with concrete, and designated as an environmental testing area, with access restricted to authorized personnel only. Satellite imagery shows the location as an unremarkable concrete pad surrounded by chain-link fencing, gradually being reclaimed by the forest. However, local residents reported unusual activity at the site between 2006 and 2007, precisely 60 years after the Caldwell's disappearance. Multiple witnesses described government vehicles, personnel in hazmat-type suits, and unusual equipment being transported to the location under cover of darkness. This activity ceased abruptly in January 2007, the same month that Rebecca Hayes discovered the Caldwell's frozen carriage, and the subsequent incident at the university research facility occurred. Danielle Mercer's investigation took an even darker turn when she managed to track down Harold Martinez, a former graduate student who had been working at the University of Maine facility on an unrelated project when the Caldwell specimens were brought in. Martinez, now teaching physics at a community college in California, was initially reluctant to speak about his experiences, but eventually relented. "I wasn't part of the primary research team," Martinez explained, "but I had access to the building and saw things I wasn't supposed to see. The official story about a refrigerant leak was nonsense. What happened in that lab defied every known law of thermodynamics. The ice didn't melt under heat, it consumed the heat and expanded. The specimens themselves were impossible. The cellular degradation that should have occurred over 60 years hadn't happened. Instead, the cells were active in a way I still can't explain. Not alive in a traditional sense, but not dead either." Martinez described observing the research team becoming increasingly obsessed with the specimens, working longer hours, and gradually exhibiting the same symptoms reported at the weather station decades earlier: lowered body temperature, reduced need for food and sleep, personality changes. Most disturbing were his observations of the specimens themselves. The researchers thought the movement they observed in the subject's eyes was residual twitching or an optical illusion. It wasn't. "I saw Elizabeth Caldwell's eyes following me across the lab when no one else was around. I saw Thomas's fingers flex slightly when one of the researchers pricked his own finger, and a drop of blood fell near the ice. They were responsive to stimuli. They were aware." According to Martinez, the situation deteriorated rapidly after a researcher named Dr. Kazan discovered historical records of similar cases and realized the cyclical nature of the phenomenon. Kazan found evidence that this entity, whatever it is, operates on a feeding cycle. It takes a couple, always a couple with a strong emotional bond, and preserves them in a state between life and death, drawing energy from their connection to each other and their fading body heat over decades. The preservation is part of its feeding method. It needs them alive in some capacity to continue generating thermal energy, but frozen to slow the consumption rate. It's horrifically efficient. Martinez claimed that Dr. Kazan had become convinced that the entity was preparing to transfer to new hosts, the research team itself. The night before everything went to hell, Kazan came to me in a panic. He said the specimens were communicating somehow, influencing the dreams of anyone who spent time near them. The researchers were being conditioned, prepared. He believed that Thomas and Elizabeth Caldwell weren't just victims, but had partially merged with the entity over the decades. They were now extensions of it, helping it prepare new vessels. Martinez had left the facility that night, calling in sick the next day, the day of the incident that officially claimed 7 lives. I should have died with them. Sometimes I think I was meant to. I have nightmares every night, dreams of cold so intense it burns, of being aware while frozen solid for decades, of watching through ice as people move around you, unable to scream or move or die. And sometimes I see faces in my freezer's ice cubes, faces I recognize from the lab, watching me, waiting. 3 weeks after speaking with Mercer, Martinez was found dead in his apartment, the official cause listed as suicide. According to the police report, the heating in his apartment had been turned off despite outside temperatures being in the low 30s, and his body was discovered in his bathtub, which had been filled with ice cubes. The medical examiner noted that the ice hadn't melted at all despite being out of the freezer for what must have been hours, and Martinez's body showed signs of advanced hypothermia, inconsistent with the ambient temperature. Danielle Mercer's investigation came to an abrupt halt in November 2020 when she traveled to Blackwood Hollow to examine local records. According to her last communication with colleagues, she planned to hike to the coordinates where the Caldwells had been found, believing that the 60-year cycle might actually operate on smaller subcycles of activity. She never returned from that hike. Search and rescue operations found her abandoned vehicle at a forest trailhead, her research materials still inside, but no sign of Mercer herself. The official report listed her as a missing person presumed dead due to exposure or animal attack, but her colleagues reported receiving strange text messages from her phone for several days after her disappearance, messages consisting only of temperature readings, each lower than the last until the final message which read only, "I understand now. The cold preserves. We're all still here, still aware. The newest ones struggle the most. You forget how to scream eventually." In January 2021, precisely 74 years after Thomas and Elizabeth Caldwell disappeared, hikers reported seeing a woman matching Danielle Mercer's description, standing at the edge of the clearing where the Caldwells had been found. She was reportedly dressed inappropriately for the winter weather, wearing only a light jacket, yet showing no signs of discomfort in the sub-zero temperatures. When they approached to offer assistance, she allegedly smiled in an unnatural manner and said, "They'll be looking for another couple soon. The hunger is growing stronger. The cycle is accelerating." When the hikers looked away momentarily, she had vanished, leaving no footprints in the snow. The following spring, park rangers discovered unusual black soil in a circular pattern, approximately 100 feet in diameter, at the location where the Caldwells had been found, significantly larger than the clearing described in historical records. Vegetation refused to grow in this area, and temperature readings consistently registered 10 to 15 degrees colder than the surrounding forest, even during summer months. Government officials quickly cordoned off the area, citing environmental concerns from an unspecified historical industrial contamination. In October 2022, Newlyweds Jason and Sophia Chen disappeared while hiking in the Blackwood Hollow area, despite the trail they were following being well away from the restricted zone. Their abandoned car was found at a popular trailhead, their equipment and supplies untouched. The search operation was unusually brief, called off after just 3 days due to what authorities described as severe and unexpected weather conditions. Local newspaper editor Michael Townsend, who attempted to investigate the limited search effort, reported being warned off by federal agents who claimed the area was now under jurisdiction of the Department of Energy for undisclosed reasons. Townsend noted in his personal blog that the Chen disappearance occurred just 5 days after unusual seismic activity had been recorded in the region, activity that seismologists could not attribute to known geological features. "Something is waking up in those woods," Townsend wrote, "and it's waking up hungry ahead of its usual schedule. The 60-year cycle that researchers have documented is shortening. The entity is adapting, evolving. And our government knows far more than they're telling us. Townsend's blog went offline 3 days after this post. His friends reported receiving strange text messages from his phone, describing intense cold and faces in the ice. Townsend himself has not been seen publicly since November 2022, though his social media accounts occasionally become active, posting only images of snowy landscapes and close-up photographs of ice formations that, when examined carefully, seem to contain distorted human features. The official stance of local and federal authorities remains that the various disappearances around Blackwood Hollow are unrelated incidents explained by the harsh wilderness, treacherous weather conditions, and occasionally foul play from human perpetrators. The restricted area in the forest is publicly designated as an environmental research zone, with access limited to authorized personnel with appropriate clearances. Yet residents of the region tell different stories. They describe a growing cold zone in the forest that expands a little each year. They talk about winter storms that seem targeted at specific areas, of ice that forms in impossible patterns, and of the voices that can sometimes be heard when the wind blows through the trees, voices that whisper names of those long missing. Some claim to have seen couples walking at the forest's edge during snowstorms, not just Thomas and Elizabeth Caldwell, but others, Jonathan and Mary Winters, William and Sarah Prescott, and most recently, Jason and Sophia Chen, all appearing exactly as they did when they disappeared, their clothing from different eras, their expressions peaceful until you catch a glimpse of their eyes, which reveal a horrifying awareness. Most disturbing are the accounts from children in the area, who independently report similar nightmares of the cold people who live in the trees. These dreams, documented by concerned parents and eventually by researchers from the University of Massachusetts Paranormal Psychology Department, share consistent elements: figures frozen in ice who can still see and think but cannot move or speak, who exist in a state of constant muffled terror for decades while something ancient and patient feeds on their fear and their fading warmth. Dr. Eleanor Wright, who studied these shared nightmare accounts, noted an alarming pattern. The nightmares intensify and become more widespread every January, peaking around January 12th, the anniversary of the Caldwell disappearance, but the cycle appears to be accelerating. We're seeing dream reports in October now and with increasing frequency. Something in that forest operates on cycles, and those cycles are shortening. If the pattern holds, we expect a significant event in January 2027, 40 years ahead of the original 60-year cycle. In December 2023, an anonymous whistleblower claiming to be a former Department of Energy employee released documents suggesting that the government has been aware of the entity in Blackwood Hollow since at least the 1950s, and that similar phenomena have been documented at 7 other locations across North America. According to these documents, the entities are believed to be fragments of something ancient that feeds on thermal energy and human consciousness, preserving its victims in a state of living death for decades while slowly consuming them. Most concerning was the whistleblower's claim that the Blackwood Hollow entity has grown substantially since 2007, with temperature anomalies now affecting an area of nearly 3 square miles. The document described a containment protocol called Winter's Coffin, designed to keep the phenomenon from spreading further, but noted that recent acceleration in the subject's growth and feeding cycle indicates containment may fail within 7 to 10 years. The whistleblower's final statement before their online accounts went silent was chilling. They're not separate incidents or different entities. Fear's all one thing, growing beneath the surface, connecting through channels we can't perceive. The frozen couples aren't just food, they're seeds. It plants them and harvests what grows from their suffering, and with each cycle, the harvest comes sooner, and the plantings more frequent. Blackwood Hollow is just the oldest site we know of. There will be more. As of this recording, the restricted area in the Blackwood Hollow forest has been expanded to cover nearly 5 square miles, with satellite imagery showing an increasing number of government structures around its perimeter. Local residents report frequent power outages during winter months, unusual weather patterns isolated to specific areas, and an increasing military presence that officials refuse to explain. The case of Thomas and Elizabeth Caldwell, the newlyweds found frozen in their carriage, may have been officially solved in the records of the Maine State Police, but the true horror of what happened to them, what continues to happen to them, and what they have potentially become represents a mystery that continues to unfold. The cold entity that took them appears to be growing stronger, its hunger more frequent, its influence spreading beyond the confines of its forest prison. For those who have pieced together the pattern, January 2027 looms as a significant date, a potential acceleration point in the entity's feeding cycle. Researchers, paranormal investigators, and concerned citizens have begun a quiet monitoring effort, tracking temperature anomalies, disappearances, and government activity around Blackwood Hollow and similar sites across the country. Meanwhile, deep in the Maine woods, where the trees grow dense and winter seems to linger longer each year, hikers occasionally report hearing the distant sound of horses' hooves and carriage wheels on snowy ground, though no tracks are ever found. Some claim to see a young couple in outdated wedding attire walking hand in hand among the trees, their skin pale blue, their movements too smooth to be natural. They are said to beckon to travelers, inviting them deeper into the woods with promises of shelter from the cold. The locals know better. They don't venture into those woods at night, especially in winter. They keep their homes warm and doors locked when the temperature drops suddenly on clear days. Most importantly, they warn visitors and their own children alike. If you ever feel a cold spot in the forest that doesn't belong, if you see ice forming where there should be none, if you hear whispers that sound like your name, run. Run toward warmth and light and other people, because in Blackwood Hollow the cold preserves. It keeps you aware. It ensures you feel everything for decades, while something ancient and patient feeds on your warmth, your love, your fear, and your fading humanity. And the hunger is growing. As I conclude this disturbing account of the Blackwood Hollow phenomenon, I urge you to remember that while darkness exists in this world, so does light. In the face of such inexplicable horror, we must turn to faith and community. Remember that even the coldest winter eventually yields to spring, and the most terrifying darkness cannot withstand the power of divine light. May God bless you and keep you safe from the cold that waits in the shadows. May Jesus Christ be your protection against the ancient hungers that lurk in forgotten places. And should you ever find yourself in the woods of northern Maine, stay on the marked paths, keep your loved ones close, and never, ever follow the sound of approaching carriage wheels when snow begins to fall.